Thus, France's sixth prime minister in just 2 years could be named by President Emmanuel Macron in the next 48 hours. That surprise announcement from outgoing Prime Minister Sébastien Lecornu, who was speaking on French television earlier on. A new prime minister is unlikely to bring an end to the political rollercoaster here in France. Earlier on Wednesday, Lecornu struck a surprisingly optimistic tone. Despite ongoing turmoil, he says a deal could be reached on the 2026 budget after last-ditch consultations with political leaders, including the Conservatives and centre-right parties. But far-right leader Marine Le Pen has hit back. She's refused to join the talks and doubled down, saying she'll censure everything. Let's take a listen to what Lecornu had to say earlier.
The pathway forward is possible. It will be difficult, but I told the president that the perspectives for dissolving parliament is becoming more and more remote, and the situation will allow us to name a prime minister in the next 48 hours.
Well, let's cross live now to the Élysée Palace. France 24's Antonia Kerrigan is standing by for us there. Antonia, we just heard Lecornu tell the French people in a televised interview that his mission is over. So what does he have to show for these last 48 hours of flash talks that he had?
Well, firstly, I think it's important to point out that the mission he was given after resigning of spending 48 hours looking for a solution for what should happen next, that mission is already very irregular. Crucially, he said that when asked if his mission had been successful, he said not completely. He said that the necessary work had been done in these last 48 hours of talks for the president to appoint a new prime minister in the next 48 hours. He acknowledged that still no one has a majority in the National Assembly, but there was a majority around one thing, and that is no absolute majority for the dissolution of Parliament. The vast majority of MPs don't think it's the right time. He also, in the end, essentially washed his hands of the situation. He said that it is, regardless, now down to the president. It is not for him to tell the president who to appoint or not appoint. It is not for him to direct the president, but that the work had been done, that we were now at the last meters before agreement, that compromises were needed from the different political groups, that we were down to the last meters, and that it is now down to the president. He remained completely loyal to the president throughout the meeting, but the overall message was that if it fails now, it is not down to him, but the president.
Well, all eyes are on Emmanuel Macron now. Where does this all leave him?
Well, of course, the France Unbowed party are calling for him to be kicked out, and the odd dissident voice in the centrist bloc as well. But Sébastien Lecornu touched on that this evening in his interview. He said now is not the time internationally for France to have a new president. That face of the nation is needed on the world stage. And he also said that if a new president is chosen, but the outstanding issues are not addressed, other levels of government, cities, local authorities, etc., will still be grappling with the same problems. He cautioned against this call for the resignation of President Macron, and indeed said that compromise was possible, that a budget was possible by the end of the year. Emmanuel Macron is now going to be faced with a dilemma, of course, as he looks for a new prime minister. It has been made pretty clear to him that he can't do what he's done these last few times of appointing different new prime ministers from his own political party. However, we know how reluctant he has been repeatedly to appoint anyone from the left. So we'll have to wait and see. But certainly all eyes are now on him. Sébastien Lecornu, as far as he's concerned, has left the building.
Antonia, appreciate that update. Thank you so much for bringing us up to speed. Antonia Kerrigan reporting live there from the Élysée Palace. Well, the fallout from all this political turmoil may not only be France's problem, but Europe's too. The country is the Eurozone's second largest economy and is critical to the continent's defence and security. This at a time when Europe battles with war and trade challenges. Well, let's bring in Quentin Peel. He's the Financial Times' former foreign editor. Quentin, thank you so much for joining us on the programme. So as I was mentioning there, France is Europe's second largest economy, and we saw on Monday when Le Cornu resigned that French stocks and government bonds fell in the aftermath of his resignation. The euro was itself weakened against the dollar. Is France's political turmoil likely to lead to a sustained weakness with the euro?
Well, it's certainly being regarded with considerable horror, I think, both in Brussels and in Berlin and other capitals of the European Union. To have a French government that's too strong is sometimes resented in Europe, but to have one that is this weak and this confused is a real problem. It certainly does undermine the European economy as a whole. The sight of France actually having to pay higher interest rates in the capital markets than both Italy and Greece, notoriously financially far more spendthrift, is really shocking. And that's certainly true in Berlin. So I think that they want stability, and they certainly don't want Emmanuel Macron to suddenly decide that he's going to go, because they are horrified at the prospect of Madame Le Pen or the Rassemblement National stepping in and becoming either the government or indeed opening the way to the future presidency.
Well, we're going to touch on that scenario if Macron resigns, excuse me, and if Marine Le Pen somehow gets into power. All of this turmoil really does beg the question, though, that how does a divided nation internally lead externally? Obviously, Europe is dealing with a number of challenges, like I said before, war and trade challenges. Talk to us about whether France's domestic fragility weakens Europe's collective posture as it faces all these challenges now.
Well, both on Ukraine, but also on trade policy, all of those areas, it's very difficult to work with a French government that actually hasn't got a clear position. Now, it would be wrong to exaggerate, I think, because President Macron has, in fact, established a pretty clear line, this desire he has for France to have for Europe to have what he calls strategic autonomy, spending much more on defense, being much more forthright in defending Ukraine, and taking a pretty strong attitude also to express its independence from the Atlantic Alliance, or greater independence from a US that is no longer so supportive of NATO. So from that point of view, I think that the Macron strategic vision is still a reality. Certainly that's the way it's seen in Brussels. But on the shorter term, sort of tactical movements in the European Union, on issues like the trade deal with South America, the so-called Mercosur trade deal, which France is very unhappy with, a weak France will not be able to block that any longer, I think. So you have a real dilemma, though, in Brussels, that they don't want to do anything to weaken Macron, but at the same time, they really want to have a much more coherent French government.
Well, you laid out the options of having snap elections or Macron himself resigning. In that case, the far right is expected to make major gains if we go back to the polls here in France. What kind of impact do you think that will have, having a strong far right in France? What kind of impact will that have on the European stage?
I think it would make life extremely difficult, because certainly if it was Madame Le Pen or indeed Jordan Bardella who was representing France in Brussels, it would be a far more nationalistic French government and attitude towards European policies, and I think a much more difficult government for the rest of Europe to work with. So there would be real worries about whether France would still remain as loyal an ally to Ukraine against the Russian invasion there as it has been under President Macron.
Well, Quentin, last question to you, because we are running out of time. What should Macron do next? What is your advice to him? How does he increase his credibility as a strategic leader in the continent? What do you think he should do?
It's so difficult to say or indeed to predict, but the openings are what? That maybe he finally has to look to a prime minister from the left, and that might mean abandoning his, or at least watering down his pension reforms and having a budget that would be more free spending, and that I think would be a real problem in the financial markets. So he's between a rock and a hard place. He really has got a difficult one to call.
Indeed. Quentin, thank you so much for joining us on the program. Really great to get your insight on this. Thank you.